Hi, and welcome to the Spooky Hours. My name's David Saunderson, and today we're talking to writer and director Kevin Gates about a church in Bedfordshire called Clophill Church. How are you? How are you, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well. It's been a long time since I've spoken to you. I mean, it was actually around about the time that your film, The Paranormal Diaries, Clophill, came out. How are you faring with the lockdown at the moment?
Yeah, I'm okay, although I've got two young kids to look after, so I'm trying to work from home, do some homeschooling and all that kind of stuff. So it is a bit crazy, as I'm
It
sure
is.
it is with most people.
I think that's right. Well, we're keeping ourselves sane by being able to talk about some of the spooky things around England. And I think Clophill's a place that that we both love, and that's why it's such a popular place for anyone who's interested in the paranormal. Can you maybe tell people about why Clophill is such a notorious spot for I was going to say paranormal thrill seekers, if that's the right term for it.
Yeah, I mean, Clophill is a very picturesque, nice village in Bedfordshire, but it is primarily known for two things. The first thing is the A6 murder in 1961, where James Hanratty was one of the last people to be hanged in the country. But secondly, and most renowned, I suppose, is the old St Mary's Church in Clophill. I can give you a bit of background on the church if you'd like.
Yeah, please do, because people who don't know about the church would love to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean the building itself is about 500 years old now. It was originally the village was actually set around the church up on the hill, but it is actually about half a mile from the high street now. Over the course of time, the village moved closer towards the river and the valley and the roads, and as the village grew over the centuries, the church became a bit of a burden to trek the half a mile up. Plus, it was very small as well. So in 1848, they built a new St Mary's Church on the high street. And the old St Mary's was just basically used as a mortuary chapel and for certain ceremonies and for burials as well. And that was all absolutely fine. But then in 1956, some enterprising thieves stole the lead from the roof.
Mm.
And from that point on, the structure was exposed to the elements, its sort of rapid deterioration. And the 1950s as well was a time of sort of revivalism in the occult. The 1951, the Witchcraft Act was repealed, so a lot of people interested in witchcraft came out of the woodwork. There's all that kind of stuff going on. And then in March 1963, an incident happened at the church which basically catapulted it into supernatural history, folklore, I suppose.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to give a bit of context, the winter of 1962-63 was one of the worst for centuries. So there was snow from Christmas right up until March, and the church itself had been basically cut off from the village, or so I'm led to believe. And nobody had gone up there for quite a long time. March the 16th, which was a Saturday, there was still snow on the ground, and two young boys from Luton decided to take a bike ride up to Clophill, which they did. They went up Old Church Path, which is the half a mile from the village to the top. They put their bikes down, wandered into the ruined structure of the church, and what they saw in the nave was, to them, 12-year-old boys, that was quite shocking. What they saw was a human skull impaled on a spike, human bones arranged in a circle around the skull. There were cockerel feathers, entrails, and blood on the ground, and there were strange symbols scrawled on the walls. Being young boys, after the sort of shock, they ended up picking up the skull and the bones, wandering around the graveyard with them, and a couple came along and saw what they were up to and told them off and marched them down the hill to the rectory to see the rector, Lewis Barker, who telephoned the police, and then within the next day, reporters were on the scene, and it became a big story. It was the first of its kind, really. And I mean, 1963 was quite a banner year for this type of stuff, but it was the first big incident, and it featured in all the national press, even sort of international as well. So it became quite a story.
So really, from there is where it got its reputation for being a sort of an evil church.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, the poor rector who was in charge at the time, he was sort of the focal point of all the press inquiries and everything. And he was a guy who was, I'd met people who knew him at the time. He was a nice guy, but he had a terrible run of luck just before he came to Clophill and during that time, which might be interesting to go into, actually, perhaps a bit after we talk about the so-called black magic at the church. A lot of people, in all the sort of press articles, they referred to it as a black mass, but the evidence on display was more similar to a sort of necromancy type ceremony. Okay. In the arrangement of the bones and the skull, there was very little that seemed to indicate a black mass anyway. But it was essentially what happened was these the people involved, and we'll also talk a bit about them later on. They went up there. I mean, when you read the reports, it says that it happened on the night of the full moon, which I think is a bit more sort of trying to romanticize it a bit more, because looking at the full moon was 6 nights before the boys discovered it, so it sort of led to believe that no one went up there for 6 days, which I don't quite believe, because the day that they found the bones, they ran into a couple immediately afterwards. So I think it happened the night before. But what these people did essentially was they tried to break into a number of tombs, all apparently women, which was quite interesting. But they did manage to get into one, which was the tomb of a lady called Jenny Humberstone, who died in 1770, aged 22. And it was her bones that they'd taken out and taken into the church. There was a lot sort of read at the time about whether she was chosen for a particular reason. She was the wife of an apothecary, which some people have linked to alchemy and things like that. But from my research, and from people I've spoken to as well, it was more similar to, a GP or something like that. So I think
some of the boots.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. A chemist. Yeah. So I think again, people are reading a lot into the sort of the reasons as to why she was chosen. But from all accounts, they were trying to dig up a female corpse. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty grisly stuff. And that was, one of the reasons why it became such a big story in the press, and that the poor rector had all this to deal with for the next 6 years.
Did they ever find out who did this?
Well, they didn't officially. I mean, there were lots of people who were spoken to at the time. The trouble is back then is that there was no, especially in the press, the mainstream press, there was no distinction between white magic and black magic. So all these people who were sort of quite popular at the time, even the likes of Gerald Gardner, were spoken to because he had a coven down in Bricket Wood, which wasn't too far away. Of course, it was nonsense that he was involved. There were a lot of the sort of the white witches of the time in their books. They do believe it was an authentic ceremony. And I'd sort of spoken to people and tried to, get as much information as I could about who could be involved. And I kind of drew a blank for quite a period of time. And then a lady from Dunstable, which is the town next to Luton, contacted me, and she was interested in Clophill, and she goes, my dad used to go up there in the 60s with his mates, and so I was sort of intrigued a bit more about accounts from this time, and unfortunately he was quite a nasty piece of work, and she hasn't seen him since she was 13. Obviously she's a middle-aged woman now, but she said that he used to go up there with his friends, and they would dig up tombs, dress up in Nazi uniforms, and conduct ceremonies to try to raise the dead. So there's all this sort of talk about, robed figures and sort of the black magicians. That account was, for me, the sort of the one that I thought was actually sounded like there was something to it. I mean, some of the descriptions she's told me, this was from her mum, who obviously had more information than she did about it, but they sacrificed chickens, cockerels, they did all this sort of stuff. So, and I said, well, how old would he have been in 1963? And he would have been 18. So it kind of fits, young guy, and he's actually still alive. I did track him down when I was doing the book and the film, but these people don't really want to talk about stuff that they did back then, especially this sort of thing. So I kind of like, I of all the sort of the possible people who were involved, that one sounded the most credible to me. But I mean, there were all kinds of theories. There was even an expose by the News of the World where they claimed this guy from London who confessed to doing it. But again, what he described was a black mass. But the evidence on display at Clophill was more about somebody trying to raise the dead, even in some crude teenager type escapade.
So over the years, it built up a reputation. Obviously, that was the burgeoning part in the '60s, where it kind of attracted more people to do that kind of behaviour. When did you first become aware of the Clophill and its reputation?
When I was a young teenager, I mean, Clophill Church, as it's called locally, is a sort of rite of passage for all teenagers in Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire. Everybody's been up there at least once, and for me, it was near Halloween 1990 as a young teenager. And we used to hang about in groups, as you do, and one of us had a car at the time, so we said, let's go to Clophill. There's witchcraft up there. The church faces the wrong way. All this sort of nonsense that's come about over the years. And of course, before the internet and not having any information on this, we had no idea what to expect. So we drove up there, shone the headlights onto the church, got out. A few of us got out, wandered around, scared ourselves senseless, and then got back in the car and drove back home. But it's one of those things that even now, I think, even with the church now, it's been done up more. Kids do still go up there, and it was always I always thought it would be a great setting for a film, whether it's a fictional film or a documentary piece. But no one had done anything, so it did take me quite a long time to come back to, well, actually, growing up, Clophill was a really cool place, and it would be a very atmospheric setting to do something on there. If we can if it's a documentary, would be great, but can we track down enough people to talk about it, to try and uncover something about the legend?
So tell me, how did you? What was the process of becoming a film?
Well, I mean, it was actually a sort of in-between project. I was doing a couple of zombie films at the time, the Zombie Diaries films, and we had a bit of time in the schedule before Zombie Diaries 2, and I thought it'd be a nice little in-between film. And originally, the way it was envisaged was as a straight documentary. We're going to go up there for a long weekend. We've got interviews set up with people. We'll stay in one of the local B&Bs, and we'll stay out there late and conduct a few experiments of our own, and just to see what happens, really. And some of the people we spoke to were really interesting. We really got into it. But we did have an idea. Michael Bartlett and I, who made the film together, Mike produced it with me. We said, well, it's going to be a straight documentary, but at the end, we're gonna keep something secret between us and one of the other crew, and we'll play a little prank on them. So we did that, and it kind of worked really well. And then so we had this whole weekend's worth of footage where we interviewed witnesses. We conducted some experiments of our own. We even had a security team involved who were not there to do anything to be on camera, but some of the more interesting stuff actually happened to them. They started experiencing weird stuff in the graveyard they couldn't explain. They were seeing figures. The whole place was locked down, so there's no way that anybody could have got in other than us. So some really interesting stuff happened. And from that original weekend's worth of filming, I went back there, and we did it ended up being a sort of a fact and fiction type documentary, or mockumentary, as you call it. But most of the footage, it was really important that almost all of the film is completely real, and we just put in these little scenes here and there, particularly at the end, which sort of link to the things that happened there in the past to do with the occult stuff. So it was an experimental film, but one that, I mean, Mike and I have made quite a lot of films together. We always said that was actually our favourite shoot. It was basically just a group of old friends getting together and spending a weekend up at a haunted ruin. I mean, it's great fun.
So when people are watching it, can they tell? Will they be able to tell at the end? What's real and what's not? Because I mean, I saw it and I enjoyed it, but I do remember the bit that's possibly not real. So
Yeah.
Do you think from a documentary point of view, it's worth watching as a documentary thing, because there is that aspect of fiction in it?
Oh yeah, I mean certainly by the end, I mean it does stray into the sort of I guess you call it the sort of found footage type genre, but not too far, because I've seen so many of those films, and I've made quite a few of them myself. But I mean, all the early stuff, all the actual investigation stuff, all the interviews with people, completely genuine. So I mean, for people actually interested in the documentary on Clophill, I mean, yeah, do check it out. I mean, and I'll be interested to know if there were bits that you thought were fake and bits that you thought were, that weren't. I mean, we had some reviews, which I always found quite amusing, is that they thought that there were scenes where we had actors involved. So, no, these people are real. These are real people. So we got some amusing feedback like that. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear people's opinions on it.
Did the filming change your view of the paranormal? Like, did you come in with any beliefs and then sort of maybe something is happening there?
I mean, I wanted to. I'm kind of on the fence. I mean, it's like in terms of religion too. I'm more of an agnostic. I want to see some sort of proof. So, I mean, some of the sort of paranormal stuff on TV that I like. I mean, I did like the early seasons of Ghost Hunters, the American one, where they go in with a sort of like to try and prove there's nothing there, you know, and not to sort of play up in the sort of most haunted type style. So, for me personally, I've always sort of been on the fence. I'd love to, I'd love to experience something. So, because I think that would change your view on a number of things in your life. So, I mean, we had the weekend up there, but I went back there for the next year whilst I was editing the film at night time. And there were twice I went up there on my own. But once on the night of the full moon, about midnight, and I also went up on the 50th anniversary of the 1963 event. You know, my night vision camera up there, just, you know, sat back in the in the long grass and just observed the church for an hour or two just to see if there's anything. I wasn't expecting anything to happen. It was actually quite peaceful. There's a few moments where you're up at the church and, you know, the hairs do stand up a bit on your back, you know, and you think, well, actually, what if there was someone behind me or something? You know, I can see ahead of me, but it's pitch black around here. But personally, I didn't experience anything up at Clophill in all the times I've been there, in the daytime and the nighttime. But that could just be that I'm not receptive enough to these things, and other people are. Personally, to Clophill, I found the occult stuff more interesting than the ghostly type goings on. But that's mainly because I know that the occult stuff, whether it was, you know, a group of pranksters or whether it was a serious black magic thing, it actually happened. It actually happened in 1963 and in the later years. So for me, that was more interesting because I knew there was some basis of fact to it.
So you went on to write a book about it, which I think you've got a copy there. You could show people the
Yes.
book. You've got a copy of the Paranormal Diaries of Clophill. Now, so you obviously thought enough of it. After doing a whole film, you wanted to write a book about it. So what is it about Clophill really that, you know, that drives you to want to know more and more about this place that you don't necessarily think is haunted, but just has that air of notoriety that is, you know, is wicked and sexy maybe?
I think it's the unsolved mystery side of things. That's what got me into it. And also, you know, setting up for the documentary and the film, I did so much research that, of course, we couldn't include in the film. And after we finished, I wanted to do something with this research, but I took it a whole lot further. I, you know, basically tried to track down every newspaper cutting, every book that referenced Clophill, speak to everybody I could who had been up there, particularly in the 60s and 70s. And I did, you know, with these types of projects, as a writer, I do get a bit obsessed with them. So I do want to sort of try and uncover that mystery and try to solve it. So I spent quite a lot of time doing all the research. I find it intriguing. It's just that sort of, you know, those, I guess it is a sort of romanticized vision of, you know, in the 60s, these clandestine goings on, you know, and there's a whole load of stuff as well, if you're into sort of conspiracy theories, about how the police covered things up, or at least didn't want to get involved or were afraid. Not so much with the 1963 incident, but there was another one in 1975, which we interviewed an eyewitness in the film, and he gave us a very interesting account. Essentially, Halloween 1975, a group of local teenagers, they were all sort of rockers. They'd heard about Clophill. They came into the village. They went to the local pub, and there was a scene a bit like American Werewolf in London, where all these teenagers went into the pub and they asked the landlord. You know, there was a picture of the old church on the wall, and they asked the landlord, "Oh, where's the old church on the hill?" And the pub went silent, and the landlord said, "There's only one church in this village, and that's on the high street." So I was like, okay, there's something not right here. And the eyewitness described that there was garlic around the windows and stuff like that, so things to ward off evil spirits. So anyway, they went up to the church, took the trip up Old Church Path, pitch black, sneaking around the long grass, and they saw there were lights on in the church. There was fire of some sort. And when they got round to the eastern side, they could see that there were two women in the nave of the church in a state of undress. There were robed figures So, as teenage boys, they got a bit close to see what was going on. And at that point, he described a shotgun going off. So at that point, they thought, okay, we better get out of here. This is a bit serious. We shouldn't be here. Ran back down the path, and there were police on the high street. And they tried to tell the police what was going on. There's a black mass going on up there. You need to go and sort it out. Someone's got a shotgun. And the police didn't seem interested at all. They were more interested in telling the guys who'd witnessed it to get the hell out of the village. They didn't seem interested in trying to stop what was going on. And what was going on, there were fires in the church. They were digging up tombs again. There was the discharge of a shotgun. All this sort of stuff that you think, well, why would the police not be up there stopping that straight away? But that's what he described. And he went back there the next morning when it had all, everyone had gone, and he did discover there were some bones in the nave of the church. There was some writing scrawled on the church in blood. So there was, whether it was people messing around who were into the occult, or whether it was a serious ritual, there was certainly something going on there that the police didn't seem interested in trying to stop. So it's all that type of stuff that really I found quite fascinating.
I imagine Clophill's a kind of place that wouldn't take kindly to strangers anyway. I would have thought that with a lot of these places, a bit like Borley and other, notoriously haunted sites around Britain, you get a lot of vandals and a lot of sort of idiots that come in. So what's it like now at Clophill? I believe it's been upgraded, so it doesn't maybe have the same kind of, creepy, eerie type of atmosphere anymore.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, unfortunately, the amateur ghost hunter has been lumped in with drug dealers and vandals, and I do appreciate that since the 60s, it has caused a problem for the villagers. Teenagers going up there every night of the week on Halloween. I've been up there on Halloween many times. It's not so much a problem now because of what they've done to it, but there were dozens and dozens of people up there. The police actually were always positioned on the high street every Halloween. And they let people go up there, but they were just there to make sure nothing got out of hand. But now the council did own the building, and then they gave it to a local trust who have done actually a really good job in doing up the church, and they've created these eco lodges nearby, so you can actually stay there. But unfortunately, they have no interest in the supernatural side of things at all. History side, absolutely fine, but nothing to do with the supernatural. They've kind of erased it from the church's history. So you can even take a tour up to the top of the tower in the church. But if you start asking them about, satanic goings on, you probably won't get a good reception. I mean, but there is some stuff that they have been criticised for. And I've not been up there for a while now, but I understand they've actually created a path out of old gravestones. So you're actually stepping on the graves of the old residents of Clophill, which I thought was a little bit disrespectful. But they, on the whole, I think they probably should be commended on what they've done in terms of restoring the ruin and stopping it being vandalised. But you're right, it has. I mean, even when we were up there in 2010, it had lost the mystique that it had in the 60s and 70s when there were tombs all over the place. Essentially, what they did in 1976 was they basically levelled the whole place. They buried all the tombs and moved all the gravestones around the circumference of the graveyard. Just because, I mean, every tomb had basically been broken into by that point. So the place was a complete mess. You could look in, you could see bones everywhere. And it wasn't a nice place for the villagers. So I can appreciate the stuff that they've done over the years. But I think if you're into ghost hunting, though, I mean, I still see stuff pop up on YouTube where people have been up there in the last few months, even. Well, it seems that way, but it certainly has lost its atmosphere.
I mean, I suppose it's a bit like Highgate Cemetery. It's not what it used to look like when it was very overgrown, but it's still Highgate Cemetery, and this is still Clophill, so people still want to go to it. The last time I went to Clophill was, I think, about 2000. The only time I went to Clophill, to be fair, was, I think, about 2014, just after the film came out, and they already had the scaffolding up there, so it didn't really have a particularly eerie atmosphere, and it was during the daytime anyway. So a lot of these places, I think you need to be there with the atmosphere at night time, and maybe just the adrenaline to feel that you're in a place that's have a history. So we'll just leave Clophill at there. But what are you doing to keep yourself busy at the moment? You've got a couple of kids, but what are you working on that's keeping you busy?
Well, given the current climate, I'm doing a lot of writing at the moment. In terms of films, I've got a couple of films that are certainly in development. We've got one that's hopefully going to pre-production this year. Although you can't make a film at the moment, you can't get out of the house much. But we've got a little horror suspense film that I'm hoping to shoot at the end of this year, which is called Appointment with the Devil, which is about two old friends who've not seen each other for 25 years, who arranged to meet on a desolate stretch of the Norfolk coast because a sinister figure from their past has re-emerged they thought was dead, and they made a pact when they were kids that if this person ever shows up again, they were going to finish the job. So it's quite a minimalist type film. It almost plays like a stage play in a way, but it is very brutal and does go into sort of subject matter that a lot of people are not interested in tackling. My wife's actually my best critic, and she read it and thought it was great, but thought it was the most downbeat thing she'd ever read. So for me, that's a compliment. So hopefully, all things equal, that one will be going into production soon. It's, if the lockdown, if we get out of this lockdown,
That's
I'm
right.
hoping we do.
Any zombie ones? You've made quite a few zombie films over the years. Any more zombies, or is life too much like that nowadays?
That's true. Oh, well, actually, there is a third part of Zombie Diaries that I've written. Depends on finance, but I've moved away with the Zombie Diaries. I mean, the first two films were done in a found footage style, but at the end of the second one, we'd moved into a traditional cinema style, and the third one picks up from the end of that, and it's not found footage anymore. So it is quite an exciting script. I'm also looking at turning that one into a novel as well, because I've really got into the writing over the last few years. So I may actually do a novel that encompasses the Zombie Diaries trilogy, but done in a sort of way that mixes journals, diaries with prose. So something a bit different, and sort of like I guess a kind of sort of British World War Z type approach. So yeah, lots going on, but with the kids at the moment, homeschooling, and I've got a 1-year-old as well. So it's my hands are quite full at the moment.
That sounds really quite busy. So I'm glad you're doing well. We'll look forward to maybe catching up with you once those films we get out of lockdown and we can maybe get those films made and we can have another chat.
That sounds great, David. Look forward to it.
Okay, no worries. Thanks very much, Kevin. You take care of yourself.
Thanks a lot. Bye.